I'm going to spare most people. Whoa! Good thing we're not using this because it's now full of coffee. So there we go. Yeah, I'm so glad this is all getting covered live on videotape of me spilling coffee everywhere. So, okay, well, welcome. It is good to have you all here, and all of you who are joining us online, welcome to the forum. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector, the senior pastor here at All Saints Church, and just thrilled today. Tamisha, I don't know how many times we've had, Dr. Tyler. I don't know how many times we've had you here. You're an old friend here. And we're going to be having just a great exploration here of the intersection of art, justice, and faith. And leading us through this, and I'll have her introduce the wonderful guest that she has brought, is Dr. Tamisha Tyler. It is so good to be able to talk to you as Dr. Tyler. That is fantastic. Dr. Tyler has been a friend of ours here at All Saints since she was a student at Fuller, and she serves as the visiting professor of theology and culture, and one of my new favorite words, and theopoetics at Bethany Theological Seminary. And she hosts workshops and classes on just these sort of things, on the intersection of diversity and community and art and justice. She works with several art organizations and projects, including Level Ground and the Grunwald Guild, and teaches in the areas of theopoetics, science fiction, theology, and womanist thought. So, and with that, Tamisha, Dr. Tyler, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let you take it from here. And it's wonderful having you all here. So, can we give her a warm welcome, please?
Check. Oh, it's on. Thank you. Oh, just in time. Last student made it. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's so good to see your faces. I'm Dr. Tamisha Tyler. Mike, you can call me Tamisha.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes, Dr. Tyler.
That's fine. It is so great to be here. Like Mike said, we're here talking about art, faith, and justice. So I'm going to introduce to you soon these remarkable artists. But I want to give you just a tiny bit of framework of where this came from. So as a professor of theology and culture and theopoetics, I am currently teaching a 2-week intensive in the areas of art, faith, and justice, and some of our students are here. They want to wave their hands, where they've been training and exploring in the ways where that intersection meets, talking to different artists in the community, and so this is an extension of that course. So before we get into exactly what we mean by that, let me go ahead and introduce our brilliant panelists. So right on the end, Phil Allen is a PhD candidate at Fuller Theological Seminary, where he was a Pinnell Center for Black Church Studies Fellow. As an emerging ethicist and theologian, his research is an integration of Black perspectives on theology and ethics, a theology of justice, understanding and healing racial trauma, and fostering ethics of racial solidarity. The development of his theology and ethics is greatly influenced by Martin Luther King Jr., and he is the author of Open Wounds, A Story of Radical Tragedy, Trauma, and Redemption, and Prophetic Lens, The Camera and Black Moral Agency from MLK to Darnella Frazier. He is a speaker, poet, and documentary filmmaker, and he is also the founder and executive director of the Racial Solidarity Project, based in Pasadena, California. As a former Division I college basketball player, and I am sure you can ask him about that after this forum, he has enjoyed opportunities as a guest chaplain for several college and professional sports teams. Let's welcome Phil Allen. Right next to Phil, we have Avril Speaks. And Avril Speaks has been carving out her path as a bold, innovative storyteller for years, not only as a producer and director, but also during her days as a professor at Howard University and as a film educator through Film Independent, the Sundance Institute, and Distribution Advocates. Avril has produced several award-winning films, including Gin, which premiered at South by Southwest and won special jury recognition for writing, and African America, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Awards, 4 African Movie Academy Awards, and streamed on Netflix. She has also produced the series Black America Is, which is a project that premiered at the Africana Film Festival and won Best Feature Documentary at the Baltimore International Black Film Festival. As a director and showrunner, Avril has worked with companies such as Now This and Vox Media Studios on docuseries such as Uprooted, The Untold Keith Warren Story, and Keep This Between Us, which are both available on Discovery and Freeform. She is currently a creative and production executive for Vox Media Studios, where she is co-showrunner for the upcoming Files of an Unexplained to air on Netflix, and she also helps to develop new projects. Avril is a recipient of the inaugural Dean Producer Award and is one of the founding members of Distribution Advocates and a newly formed Producers Union. Let's welcome Avril Speaks. And right next to me is Lorinda Hawkings Smith. Lorinda is an accomplished actor, author, advocate, musician, writer, comedian, and filmmaker. Her acclaimed book and solo play trilogy, Justice, or Just Me, is based on her journey as a domestic violence survivor who earned her MBA while transitioning from houseless to house. A true artivist, Lorinda is at home combining art and social justice. Her activism has been recognized by Congress, the Senate, the LA Supervisor, and the California Legislative Assembly. Her comedy has received awards from the City of Hawthorne and the Burbank Comedy Festival. A certified domestic violence advocate and violence prevention specialist, Lorinda is a Peace Over Violence Advisory Circle member. Lorinda is currently a choir and program instructor for Urban Voices Project and hosts a monthly open mic night in downtown LA for the Los Angeles Poverty Department at the Skid Row History Museum and Archive. You can connect with her through her social media or at her website, LorindaHawkingsSmith.com. And please, before you leave this room, ask her about Biddy Mason. Let's welcome Lorinda Hawkings Smith. So our faith and justice, very big words, very large intersection, am I right? One of the things that we think about when we think about these three things is, what do they have to do with another? We know how art and faith connect. We know how faith and justice connect. We know how art and justice connect. But what is the hinge point for the three of them? One of the things we talked about in our first day of class is the understanding of how we think about the definition of faith. The Bible says faith is the evidence of things, or the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen. Art is the work in the material. We work with materials. We work in creating materials. We heard from one of the artists this week that gave us a quote that said, art is God's grandchildren. They are the things that we create, right? Justice is the work that we do so that we can begin to manifest and bring in the kind of worlds that we're hoping for, the kind of spaces that we want to see. Do you see where I'm going with this? Do you hear how faith becomes then the hinge point between art and justice? Because faith is the substance, the material of the kind of world that we are hoping for. And so the ways that we get to even work out our faith is by using those materials to bring about the worlds that we know should be in place, right? Pushing back against those sense of injustices. So as we are engaging this class, we're talking about the ways that the material of art, whether our own creative ability, whether the pieces that we make, even the work of working with materials ourselves, then become the practice through which we can bring about the kinds of worlds and the kind of spaces that we are hoping for. Faith is not some abstract theoretical thing that we're engaging in. It's situated in the material, right? I tell people who are in graduate school all the time, I haven't finished school forever and ever, and now the evidence of the thing you have not seen yet in your own life. I then become the substance. That's what testimony is. It's giving you substance of the thing you were hoping for, right? So how can art and the work of the material help us to move into those spaces? And so what we're gonna hear from, they're not gonna give you, well, they can give you a definition of art, faith, and justice, but they're just gonna talk about their work. Because this is not the kind of intersection where you need to parse out each, what is art, what is faith? No. This is about asking questions about why are they intertwined in the way that they're intertwined. Why do they come up in the way that they come up? One of the things that we have been following, and I'm going to ask my students to shout out, is in a world where we have constant economic, environmental, racial upheaval, who do we follow? You follow the artists, right? People in economics may follow the money. We're following the artists. What are they doing? Why? A few weeks ago we had, what was it a few weeks ago? Probably it was a few months ago now. Time is weird. We did the Afrofuturism panel, and we talked about Octavia Butler. That is just an inspiration of follow the artist. What did she do? How did she respond to what was happening in her world? She used her art. We went to an exhibit, and they were for the Butler Archives, and one of the things we heard was a lot of activists come to the exhibit, and they want to know, wow, she surely has all these rally pins of all the marches she went to, and she had all these different ways that she was out marching and doing these things. No, she doesn't have any of that. She used the material of her art to bring about the world that she was hoping for. So I'm going to allow them to just talk about their work, talk about what comes up for them when they think about this intersection, and then we're going to have a conversation. And I want you to be ready, because all of my classes are engaged. So you're here now, which means you got to work. Which means you got to ask good questions. Which means you got to have conversation. I want you to think about your own social location. What communities are you taking back to? What communities are you representing? What spaces are you representing in this conversation? And how does that inform where you are? Think about that as you hear their stories, and ask questions that help you imagine how your world and their world intersect. Sounds good? You're great students. I love you. Let's go ahead and start with Lorinda.
Check, check. Hey, there I am. Awesome. Faith, art, and justice. The faith, the substance. Well, I believe faith without works is dead. So I think it's important that I am doing something to try to bring about what I am faithful will happen. So in my art, whether it's spoken word, whether it's a play, whatever format, I'm telling a story, but my intention is to dispel notions that are ingrained and to hopefully give new perspectives, new insight on issues that seem so overwhelming. But I think it's important to do it with song or what have you, and I feel like wherever I go, I will show up with all of that, the faith, art, justice. When I'm doing comedy, I've had requests, just don't be political. And I feel like I walk through the door, I'm political. Because there's the black, there's the hair, there's, the Crown Act theory. It's like, let's go. But I'm faithful that with our art, it is healing. And I feel like that's when the justice comes, with that healing. So I'm just gonna.
Thank you for that.
Hello. So I think for me, when I think about what comes up for me with those words, I go all the way back to growing up in the church. And my sort of introduction to art and sort of the purpose of it and the theory of it goes back to the church. I grew up in a AME church in Queens, New York. And, my first play was on stage. We had a big, room just like this, and we put on play. We were doing The Wiz. And a lot of it was, at that time, during that time period, and the particular pastor that we had during that time, the philosophy, it came back to community. And so that's another part for me in terms of art, faith, and justice. It's also community, which translates to audience, in in film terms. But the whole thing was about how are we engaging with the community? And so it's the act of making the art is part of that practice. And then it's also how are we engaging in that art. And so when we would do plays like The Wiz at church, it's the making of it itself that we're coming together and we're gathering and we're having an experience in making it. But then also it's afterwards when we're consuming it together and we're talking about it and we're having conversations. So that's kind of that. I think that that's been planted in me from the very beginning. And so now my work tends to focus on, the community in that aspect or the audience. And for me, it's about what conversation are we having as a result of this. And so, and I think right now it's broadening a little bit because I realize, I work a lot in, you read my bio, I work a lot in film, but I do a lot of independent film, which tends to be very, you're having conversations that not necessarily everyone else in the country is having. When I think about my family back home in Georgia, they're not talking about, a lot of the films that I love, the independent films, it's great, but it's not the larger conversation. So now in my work, I'm still thinking about that intersection of art, faith, and justice through the lens of audience and through community. And it's like, how do we have a conversation that everyone can be a part of and that everyone feels like they can contribute, just across the board. So I'm kind of thinking about audiences in different pockets, if you will. So I still do a lot of independent and have those conversations in those circles, but it's also what is the wider conversation that can be had about any topic. But yeah, I think that those, I would kind of say like that's a fourth thing to me as far as art, faith, justice, and it's so much is it about community. Yeah.
So I'm a dreamer, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about art and faith. For me, growing up in a very dysfunctional home, I dreamt of a different world, something new, something fresh, something safe. So for me, whatever I envisioned, whatever I dreamed, I saw it in words first. So I'm a poet, an author now, but I love words. So having the faith that something new could be created, the faith that I could experience something different, because my art fueled my faith, church didn't. And I loved the church, was a pastor for 16 years, but growing up in the AME space, it set the foundation for my faith, but it didn't fuel my faith. Being an undercover poet back then, I wouldn't call myself a poet, but I was writing poetry ever since I was a kid because that was my escape. And that was a way that I could put words to what I was dreaming about, this new life, a different life, safer for mom, safer for me, safer for my sisters, what have you. So for me, the connection of art and faith, they're inextricably tied, those two words, those two things. So moving forward throughout my life, I've always used words. I've always played with words. I wanted to make things with words by making words, putting words together first. And hopefully create new ideas, help other people dream. And then also with those words, tell stories. And so I then began to look back on my life growing up and those before me and began to tell stories. And hopefully those stories would not just fuel people's faith, but the stuff I write about now points to justice, doing the work that we need to do, because here's what happened, and now here's what we need to do, or I think we should do to move forward. So I've always played with words to help try to realize my dreams, my goals, a new space, a new community. Those are the first things that come to mind when I think of that intersection, is how art fueled my faith. It's what gave me something to hold on to.
Yeah, that's good. I kind of want to stay in this community space because I think that the community is so important, not just the advocacy that each of you are doing in your own way, whether through film or telling stories, but in the communities that sent you and in the ways in which creativity was cultivated in you as a part of who you are and as a part of your faith. Tell me a little bit about, I want to ask this question about, tell me who you are. Tell me who you are in terms of your community and the people that have sent you, or in spite of having to be the undercover poet, or maybe in the spaces where you couldn't be creative in those words. Who are the people that help to nourish that space of creativity? So who sent you? Who is your community that helped to nourish you into these stories? Maybe it's the AME Church. Maybe it's in spite of aspects of church. Who sent you? And who is continuing to nourish your creativity?
That's an interesting question. Who sent me? I'm an only child, so I had to be creative growing up. The AME Church was my first church as well here in Pasadena, first AME, but we weren't faithful churchgoers growing up. My community, I'd hate to say, was TV, film.
That's a community, yeah.
Yeah. My mother was a teacher, and she introduced me to my first musical. My father loved music, so Frank Sinatra and the music from musicals would be playing through the house. So I grew up on that. And as far as the community, I feel my faith fuels me with where I'm planted. That's what I'm figuring out. Wherever I'm planted, that's the community I need to become part of. And sometimes that can be a culture shock and can be jarring, like in Skid Row at first, like, ooh, okay. But then when you become one of the community, it's like different than, I call it stick and move, like you drive in, drop some food off, and then leave. It's like, but if you're part of the community, you're family. And then you advocate. You want to see best and better for your family. So I feel like I move in many different communities. I feel like there's the houseless, so I'm part of the housing justice community. Talked to Phil briefly about Jill Shook. Shout out Jill Shook, making housing happen. Domestic violence or survivors. I advocate for survivors. I feel like in a way we're all surviving something, ooh, especially with the pandemic. But when I'm from Pasadena, I like to call myself a Dina Dame. But when I'm, I claim both Altadena and Paso. And when I was living in LA for a number of years, I was part of that community. But when I came back to Pasadena, it's like, what's going on with the housing in Pasadena? So yeah, we're talking about faith, art, justice, but yeah, the homeless count is coming up. I want to be part of that. I think that's part of it, but I still keep my connection with the other communities, like the Skid Row community, LA, but I feel so not to be overwhelmed. Just starting where you are with that community helps a lot with me anyway.
I would say in terms of who sent me, that's like such a great question and a great way to phrase that. I do think for me, I do think that the church sent me. I feel like, I mentioned before growing up and, kind of having that exposure, but like I always say, the first support that I ever got as an artist has always come from the church. In terms of nourishing that is another story. I wouldn't say that the church necessarily nourished it, simply because I think over time I've realized that my my passion and my voice lies in, I'm always drawn to stories about women and about spirituality, but I call it complex spirituality. And, so I talked before about wanting to have conversations, and oftentimes the conversations that I want to have, the church doesn't always want to have those conversations. And so I wouldn't say that they nourished it necessarily, but definitely cultivated or started it from the beginning. And I think a lot of, that notion of community has come through that ethos in that church in particular, because I think that that church that I grew up in had a very specific way, excuse me, of going about it. And thank you. And that really influenced me a lot. And then, even in physical ways of just like my very first film that I made, like my church came through. Like, they donated, they, cooked. They were like, we're gonna cook y'all, man. Like, they made us dinner. Everybody's like, that's the best set I ever had, like the best meals I ever had. And, they came through and really supported in that way. But like I said, kind of moving on from that, then I had to kind of expand and I would even say, I just had to expand in terms of cultivating and nourishing that voice.
So I'm gonna, each topic, art, faith, justice, there's someone who sent me. My mother sent me. I remember reading Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, Nikki Giovanni, 3 of my favorite poets. But I remember being in 4th grade, 3rd grade, saying, but I couldn't do that. That's for them. They're the poets. That's not me. And then my mom wrote a poem for her mother on Mother's Day. And I read it. And it was just as powerful as what I had read in the books. That was the day I became a poet. So I always give my mom credit for allowing me to see, to touch a poet, right? My mom sent me. My mom's mom sent me. When I talk about faith, man, no one embodied the grace of God like my grandmother. And I eulogized her, I talked about this. She's the only person I could tell my worst stuff to. I thought she took some secrets to the grave, but she told some folks. She told my mom, I'm like, when I see this woman in heaven, we gonna have a conversation. But I could call my grandmother, and I did something. It was the worst thing that I think I could have done, because someone could have been seriously injured or killed. And I saw the grace of God. She was more interested in healing and restoring than she was in condemning and punishing. That's where I learned God's grace. My mom's mom sent me. My dad's mom sent me. This woman, I write about this is my story, Open Wounds. My grandfather was killed in 1953 and shot in the back of the head, I say at the hands of racism. So she's now left to raise 4 children on her own. My grandmother was doing sit-ins in the 40s as a teenager. She was leading them when there was no camera. So before the 60s, my grandmother was already making good trouble. And she was tough as nails. If it wasn't right, she's gonna speak on it. She was the person that would, when she came, you knew she was coming to, something was wrong and we need to fix this. This ain't right. So when it came to justice, I saw it in her. My dad's mom sent me.
I don't know if you've ever thought about preaching, but You should look into it. I'm just saying.
I'm a recovering pastor. I don't know.
I want you to be thinking about some questions. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to get my Oprah on, and we're going to turn it to y'all. So one of the things that we always say, and we learned this week, is that an artist's ability to work in the material is not only about how great you can sculpt or how you can craft words or make films, but it's their ability to see, how they see the world, and how they help other people to see. And I think that there's so much resonance in not just how each of you see the world, but how each of you see stories of people that need to be brought to the forefront so that other people can see, whether that is Biddy Mason or a great-grandfather or really, great films like Gin or Black America Is, right? Bringing these stories to the forefront to say we need to have a conversation. And we need to have the kinds of conversations that we don't have permission to have generally. How do we create these spaces where people can go, oh, I never thought about that, or I never saw that before. I didn't see how that connected. Now I'm ready to have a different conversation. As you are thinking about your own work moving forward, side note, this is a great time to plug anything you're doing in the next. But as you're thinking about your work going forward, what do you want others to see? Especially as it relates to those worlds that we're hoping for. What do you want people to see?
The first thing that comes to my mind when I hear the question, what do I want others to see in my work? And what stands out is themselves. I feel we are a community. Like it's been said, we are one. We are not, I don't feel like there should be any others. I feel like it is us. So on that note, to plug, coming up, I do have some writing workshops, one at Altadena Library and one at La Pintoresca Pasadena Library. And why I really love doing these workshops is because I feel like I want to help you find your voice. You know, a lot of times we might feel like Reverend Phil, like, you know, I'm not a poet or who wants to hear my words, but a lot of times your story could be somebody else's story as well. What you're feeling, you know, just not communicated. And if you're brave enough to communicate it, oh my gosh, it could free so many people. And it's freeing. So that's what I want people to see in my work. And just the possibility of better. And my third book in my series should be coming out soon. Justice or Just Me, The Bite, The Fight, The Flight. Thank you.
I mean, I was going to say the same thing. Yay!
Why were you going to say the same thing?
But, you know, I would maybe just riff off of that and say ourselves and also see others. You know what I mean? It's like see ourselves, but also see what other people are going through. Because I think there's a lot of healing that can come from that. And I'm not going to plug a project I have coming up, but I will plug a project that's already out. So a project that I did called Uprooted was a documentary about a young woman who was fighting for her brother in 1986, was found hanging from a tree in Maryland, in Silver Spring, Maryland. And the police ruled it a suicide. She has spent the last, 35 years, or what have you, since 1986, trying to get justice for her brother. We did this series, we shot it in 2021, when we filmed her. And she's like a firecracker. Like, she'll go off on you in a second. I mean, she's, just really a truth teller. But what's amazing to me is that it's been all of those years. It's been 35 years, and to see her now, and we were hoping that we would, justice would be served as one of the documentary. That didn't happen, but to see her now, she's a whole different person, and all she needed was to tell her story and for people to listen. That's all she needed. And to talk to her, to even looking at her on Instagram, it's like, if you look at her in 2020 versus today, it's night and day. To talk to her, and she's still fighting for justice for her brother, but it's a marked difference. It brought so much healing. So I would say, to see, that's what I would, that's what I want, is, for us to see ourselves, but also to see others and see their pain or see their joy, see what they're going through, and hopefully be able to, empathize and relate.
Wow. So I'm going to plug first and then talk about what I want to see people to see.
He wants to see you get whatever he's going to tell you.
So I was inspired to write my book, Open Wounds, and the documentary short by a similar story, Always in Season, by Jackie Oliver. When I went to Sundance, I saw this film, young man, 10 years ago now, found hanging in Bladensboro, North Carolina, and the details of his story connected so much to the details of my grandfather's story. And it inspired me to write Open Wounds. It's in Romans, Amazon, but support your local bookstore. And Prophetic Lens is in Romans, support your local bookstore. But what do I want people to see? So I went to school to be an architectural engineer. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to design homes, buildings, what have you. And some of the projects we had to do was to design the plumbing system, to design the electrical system of the house, the parts of the house we don't see. So my research and my dissertation is about exposing the parts of the social structure we don't see. So while people are fighting each other, what we don't realize, I think we know it here, but we don't really get it, that what perpetuates racism and all the other isms are structures and the properties and the principles that have already been laid in place, how we come to know things, how we maneuver, and how the spatial arrangement. It's strategic, and it's been here for decades. Going back to slavery, the things were set in place, and now we can sit back. People can sit back and just kind of let things play out. And while we end up fighting each other because we respond to as Resmaa Menakem would say, the shark in the water. The George Floyd, the Arbery, we respond to that, but it's the structures we don't see and understand fully. Amen. That's what I want people to see. So the last 3-4 years, that's what I've been writing and researching and trying to develop and come up with language so that we could see the plumbing system in the house, not just the brick and mortar, the windows and all that, the landscape, but we can see what's underneath, what's behind all of this, and begin to maybe respond differently in the future.
That's good. That's good. Do you want me to use that one for questions?
I'm going to flip with you because then I can go out.
Okay. You're good? Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left for our online folks, but then we can stay here in this. Well, y'all stay as long as you want.
Yeah.
So in about 5 minutes, we'll say goodbye to our online folks, but let's just open it up.
Questions? We have one here.
Thank you all. This was amazing, so inspirational, fabulous, and really nice to be introduced to you all artists. And I wanted to just ask you kind of a superficial question, but maybe not. Who are some of your artistic inspirations of today?
Great question. You already know mine. What are yours?
Well, just because this is fresh on my mind, I would say one of my inspirations is Ava DuVernay.
Yes.
Just because I love the way she's doing what she's doing. If you haven't seen Origin, I mean, talk about having a conversation. That's a movie to have a conversation about. And the fact that, she's just doing it in a space that's, kind of on her own terms, is very inspiring to me. I think I've always, ever since she's kind of blown up on the scene, because I know she's been around for a long time, even before the world knew her as a director, she's just always been that person of just go do it. Like, don't wait for permission. Don't wait for this person to recognize you or for Hollywood to recognize you. Just do it. Just get out there and do it. And I just love that ethos, and that's what I'm about. It's let's just do it. Do it on your own terms. Do it on your, however, by any means necessary. Just do it. Make your art. And I love that about her, and the fact that she's just made this movie that's 3 hours long. If anybody's seen it, it's very heady, I mean, but it's begging for a conversation. And she had to do that on her own terms. Hollywood's not gonna fund that. So yeah, that's one of my current inspirations.
Love that.
And I echo that, Eva, amazing. Jordan Peele is one of mine, because it's seeing Get Out just was yes, yes, the humor and the darkness, yes. But then, and I just saw the Inner City Youth Orchestra last night in Lift Every Voice, and they put music to The Hill We Climb. And that's powerful, and the reason is because their thinking is it's easier to remember words when they're put to music.
Yeah.
So I would say, and I'm doing all this talking because that poetess, her name has just gone out of my head. Amanda, and my daughter's name is Amanda. So yeah, it's been that kind of a morning. Yeah, so our youth, so I'm inspired.
That's a hard one for me because all mine are really gone. I was going to say Amanda Gorman has inspired me. Anybody who can take words and paint pictures, but also inspire you to the depths of your soul, and also get you to think, get you to cry, get you to laugh. Anyone with that skill, whether it's in film as a writer, an actor with a monologue. Yeah, I would say Amanda Gorman comes to mind. I want to say the Toni Morrisons and the Maya Angelou's, but they're gone. They're gone now. So I have no problem looking at the youth and being inspired by those younger than me. I call her say youth, but she's just younger than me. I'm only 25 or so. But Amanda Gorman, we're gonna go with that.
Yeah. So yeah, just real quick, and I'll get to Monique. We're going to say goodbye to everyone turn a wave at the camera. We're going to say goodbye to our streaming folks.
Thank
just
you
a
for
reminder,
joining
next
us.
week, we've got Nadia Bowles-Weber here, and we're going to talk about what does it mean to be a community of faith in just a really weird time, and how do we do that? And Nadia is always just insightful and entertaining and heartfelt, and so please come back then. So goodbye to those of you who are tuning in online, but we're going to keep going here in the room. And Monique, let me get you the mic here.
Thank you so much for coming. This has been amazing. My question is, as an artist, writing about